3 months of peace. That's how long it lasted before Victor Marchetti made his final move. I should have known it was too easy. Should have recognized that a man like Victor, proud, vindictive, accustomed to power, wouldn't simply fade into the shadows. But I was too happy to notice the warning signs. Too wrapped up in the life Nico and I were building together. My studio had become everything I dreamed of. Natural light flooding through industrial windows. Equipment I could never have afforded on my own. A growing client list that had nothing to do with Nico's world. Engagement sessions, family portraits, commercial work that let me exercise creative muscles I'd almost forgotten I had. And at home, because the grandmother's house was truly home now, I'd found something I'd never expected. Belonging. The kind of deep-rooted certainty that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. Nico had changed too. Not fundamentally. He was still the same calculating, dangerous man who'd locked me in a room and told me I knew too much to leave. But the edges had softened. He laughed more. Worked less. Spent evenings teaching me to cook Italian recipes his grandmother had passed down, or reading beside me in the library while rain traced patterns on windows that had witnessed generations of secrets. "You're staring again," he observed one such evening, looking up from his book. "I'm admiring." "There's a difference." "Is there?" He set aside his reading, pulling me into his lap. "What exactly are you admiring?" "The way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating. The little gray streak you're pretending doesn't exist." I traced the hair at his temple. "The fact that the most dangerous man in New York reads poetry before bed." "Dante." "The original one." He smiled. "My grandmother's favorite. She used to read it to me when I couldn't sleep." "Tell me more about her." "I've told you everything." "Tell me again." "I like hearing it." So he did. Stories of a woman who'd crossed an ocean with nothing but determination. Who'd built a family in a strange land and protected it with a ferocity that shaped generations. Who died so that her grandson could live, and in doing so created the ghost who now held me in his arms. "She would have loved you," Nico said when the stories wound down. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said I needed someone who could see past the shadows. Someone brave enough to love the darkness instead of running from it." His lips brushed my forehead. "That's you, Chloe. It was always meant to be you." "That's very romantic for a crime lord." "Former crime lord." "Mostly." He grinned. "I prefer a legitimate businessman with a complicated past." "Is that what we're calling it now?" "It's what the lawyers are calling it. I'm just following their lead." I laughed and he kissed me, and for a moment everything was perfect. Then his phone rang. The expression on his face as he answered told me everything I needed to know. "What is it?" I asked when he hung up. "Victor. He's made a move." Nico was already standing, reaching for his jacket. "Stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can." "Nico." "Please, Chloe. Just this once, stay where it's safe." He was gone before I could argue. He didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next morning. By noon, I was pacing the house like a caged animal, checking my phone every 30 seconds, imagining every possible disaster. When Sal finally appeared, his face told me everything. "Where is he?" "Victor's compound." "He went alone, trying to negotiate." "It was a trap." Sal's voice was heavy. "They're holding him." Demanding concessions, territory, money, a public acknowledgement that Victor is still a force to be reckoned with. "And if they don't get those things?" Sal didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Take me there," I said. "Miss Bennett, that's exactly what Victor wants. Your leverage. The moment you show up, the moment I show up, I'm a distraction. Something Victor has to deal with instead of focusing all his attention on Nico." I grabbed my jacket. "I'm not asking, Sal. Take me there or I'll find my own way." He studied me for a long moment. "Nico said you were trouble. The best kind of trouble." He wasn't wrong. Sal almost smiled. "Follow me." Victor's compound was a fortress in upstate New York. Stone walls, armed guards, the kind of security that made Nico's grandmother's house look like a vacation cottage. But security only works when people are looking. And Victor wasn't looking for a photographer with a camera bag and a desperate plan. "I need to get inside," I told Sal as we surveilled from a distance. "Without being seen." "That's impossible." "The perimeter is there." I pointed to a service entrance, partially hidden by overgrown hedges. "Deliveries. Catering, maybe. Something regular enough that the guards don't pay close attention." "How do you know that?" "Because I've photographed 100 events at places like this. Rich people always have service entrances, and they always underestimate the help." I checked my camera. "I need a uniform. Something that makes me invisible." "You're insane." "Probably. But it's the only chance Nico has." Sal made some calls. 20 minutes later, I was dressed as a catering assistant, my camera hidden in a bag of tablecloths, walking toward a door that could lead to freedom or death. The guards barely glanced at me. Inside, the compound was chaos, staff rushing to prepare for what appeared to be a party, decorations going up, food being prepared. Perfect cover for a woman who knew how to blend into the background. I moved through corridors I'd never seen, following the whispers of staff who gossiped about the prisoner and Mr. Marchetti's special guest. Eventually, I found myself outside a door guarded by two men who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. "I'm supposed to set up for the photography session," I said, holding up my bag. "Mr. Marchetti wants everything documented." "No one told us about any." "Call him if you want." But he seemed pretty insistent on capturing this moment for posterity. I shrugged. "Your funeral if you delay things." They exchanged uncertain glances. Then one stepped aside. I was in. Nico looked terrible. They'd put him in a chair in the center of a room that was clearly designed for intimidation. Sparse furniture, cold lighting, chains on the walls that suggested this wasn't the first interrogation it had hosted. His face was bruised, his lips split, his hands bound behind his back. But his eyes, those dark, beautiful eyes, lit up when he saw me. "Chloe." My name was a prayer and a curse. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Saving you." I knelt beside him, working at his bonds. "Hold still. You need to leave." "Victor will." "Victor is busy preparing for his victory celebration. He thinks he's already won. The ropes loosened. He underestimated both of us." "I love you." "I know. That's why I'm here." The bonds fell away. "Can you walk?" "I can run if it means getting you out of here." He stood, swaying slightly. "How did you get in?" "Pretended to be staff." It's amazing what people don't see when they're not looking. "My brilliant photographer." He pulled me into a brief, fierce kiss. "Now let's go before." The door opened. Victor Marchetti stood in the entrance, flanked by armed men, his expression a mixture of fury and triumph. "I thought you might try something like this," he said. The loyal girlfriend, rushing to her beloved's rescue. How predictable. "Victor." Nico stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. "This is between us." "Let her go." "I don't think so. She's proven herself remarkably resourceful, too resourceful to let walk away." Victor gestured to his men. "Kill them both. Make it look like an accident." The guards raised their weapons. And then everything happened at once. Explosions rocked the compound, not inside but at the perimeter. Gunfire erupted in the distance. Victor's men spun toward the windows, distracted by chaos they hadn't anticipated. Sal's voice crackled through a speaker. "Nico, we're coming in." "Hold your position." What? Victor's face contorted with rage. What is this? Contingencies. Nico's smile was cold. Did you really think I'd walk into a trap without backup? Did you think Chloe coming here was an accident? You used her as bait. I trusted her to do exactly what she did. Find a way in, cause a distraction, give my people time to position. Nico moved toward Victor as the sounds of battle grew closer. You underestimated her, Victor. Just like you underestimated me. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The door burst open. Sal and a team of armed men poured in, overwhelming Victor's guards with brutal efficiency. Within seconds, the situation was reversed. Victor on his knees, surrounded by guns, his empire crumbling around him. You have two choices, Nico said, crouching to meet Victor's eyes. Disappear completely. Leave the country, leave the continent, leave everything behind. Or die here now, in this room that's seen so much death already. You wouldn't I? Nico's voice was ice. You kidnapped me. Threatened the woman I love. Tried to destroy everything I've built. He leaned closer. Give me one reason not to end you. Victor's eyes darted to me. I saw him calculating, searching for leverage, finding none. Fine, he said finally. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. I'd better not. Nico stood. Sal, escort Mr. Marchetti to the airport. Make sure he gets on a plane to somewhere very far away. With pleasure. They dragged Victor out, and suddenly, impossibly, it was over. I sagged against the wall, the adrenaline draining from my body. You planned this, I said. All of it. I planned for the possibility. I didn't plan for you to be so brilliant in execution. Nico crossed to me, cupping my face in his hands. You were supposed to stay home. Stay safe. Since when do I do what I'm supposed to do? Never. That's what I love about you. He kissed me deeply. Thank you. For coming. For saving me. For being exactly who you are. Don't mention it. Just maybe next time, give me a heads up before the heroic rescue. Deal. He took my hand. Now let's go home. I have something I've been meaning to ask you. He asked me at sunrise. We stood in his grandmother's garden, our garden now, surrounded by flowers that had survived generations of winters. The early light painted everything gold, and Nico dropped to one knee like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had a speech prepared, he said. Something eloquent about fate and destiny and all the wrong doors that led to the right place. But looking at you now, the only words I can find are simple ones. Simple works for me. I love you, Chloe Bennett. I love your courage and your curiosity and the way you see beauty in everything, even the darkness. Especially the darkness. He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, nothing like what I'd expected from a man of his resources. This was my grandmother's. She told me to give it to someone extraordinary. It took me 35 years to find her. Nico, marry me. Not because you have to. Not because it's the logical next step. But because I can't imagine a single day without you, and I don't want to try. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at this man who'd turned my world upside down, who'd shown me darkness and light in equal measure, who'd made me braver than I'd ever been alone. Yes, I whispered. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I pulled him to his feet. Though I reserve the right to walk through any door I want. He laughed, sliding the ring onto my finger. I wouldn't have it any other way. We married in the garden, 1 year to the day after I'd walked through the wrong door. Bianca stood as my maid of honor, still slightly bewildered by how her photographer friend had ended up engaged to a reformed crime lord. Sal stood as Nico's best man, his stoic expression cracking into something almost like joy. The guest list was small, a mix of my photography clients and Nico's legitimate business associates, People who knew enough of the truth to celebrate it and enough of discretion to never speak of it. "You look beautiful," Nico murmured as I reached him at the altar. "You look nervous." Terrified, actually. He took my hands. "This is the most dangerous thing I've ever done." "What is?" "Letting myself be happy. Believing it can last." "It can last," I promised. "We'll make sure of it." The ceremony was simple. Vows that spoke of finding light in unexpected places, of love born from chaos, of two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives and refused to stumble back out. When the officiant pronounced us married, Nico kissed me like the world was ending and beginning all at once. And in a way it was. 2 years later, I stood in my studio, reviewing proofs from a recent shoot when Nico appeared in the doorway. "You're supposed to be at a meeting," I said without looking up. "Meeting ended early. I wanted to see my wife." "Your wife is very busy." "Your wife is always busy. It's what I love about her." He crossed to wrap his arms around me from behind. "But she also needs to come home. There's something waiting for her." "What kind of something?" "The kind that requires your presence." Kissed my neck. "Trust me." "Always." He drove us home, the grandmother's house that had become so thoroughly ours that I could no longer imagine it any other way. But when we pulled up, something was different. Balloons. Streamers. Cars in the driveway that I recognized as belonging to Bianca, Sal, and others I'd come to call family. "What is this?" "Your baby shower." Nico's grin was impossibly smug. "Surprise." I stared at him, then at the house, then down at the barely visible curve of my belly that we'd been keeping secret for months. When did you?" "I've been planning for weeks." Bianca was very helpful. He took my hand. "You've spent 2 years building a life with me, Chloe. I wanted to show you that the life we're building includes everyone we love." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I walked through the wrong door," I said. "You did. And I found everything." "We both did." Kissed me softly. "Now come inside. Bianca's made a cake and I'm terrified of what happens if we're late." I laughed, letting him lead me toward a house full of people who loved us, toward a future that had seemed impossible on a night when I'd known too much to leave. I'd known too much to leave. But I'd learned even more by staying. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed, she accidentally walked into his private meeting. Please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Your comments mean the world to me. Let me know what you thought and what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Until next time, keep reading and stay mysterious. The first week was an education. Lorenzo moved me into his penthouse. "For convenience," he said, though we both knew it was for control. I had my own room, my own bathroom, my own space that felt nothing like my own. Everything was expensive. Everything was perfect. Everything belonged to him, including, apparently, me. "You'll need a new wardrobe," he announced on day 3, sliding a black credit card across the breakfast table. "Something appropriate for the events you'll be attending." "My clothes are fine." "Your clothes are for jazz clubs and coffee shops. You'll be mingling with politicians, CEOs, old money families who can spot cheap fabric from across the room." He pushed the card closer. "Consider it an investment." "In what?" "In your effectiveness." His eyes swept over me with clinical assessment. "You're beautiful, Arya. But beauty without presentation is wasted potential. I'm not a product to be packaged. You are exactly that. For the next 12 months, you're my product. My representative. Every word you speak, every dress you wear, every gesture you make reflects on me." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Enzo will take you shopping. Don't embarrass me." He left before I could argue that I spent the next 6 hours in boutiques I'd only ever walked past, trying on clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. Enzo followed silently, paying for everything without comment, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't shopping, I was being outfitted by the time we returned to the penthouse. I had a new wardrobe, a new hairstyle, and a growing rage that had nowhere to go. You look different. Lorenzo was in the living room when I walked in, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Better. I look like someone else. You look like someone who belongs in my world. He set down his glass, moving closer. The first event is tomorrow night. A charity gala at the Met. You'll accompany me as my date. Your date? My companion. My accessory. Whatever word makes you comfortable. His hand brushed my newly styled hair. You'll smile. You'll charm. You'll listen to everything people say when they think the pretty singer isn't paying attention. And then you'll report back to me. What exactly am I listening for? Anything interesting? Business deals. Political alliances. Personal scandals. He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes. The powerful assume their conversations are private. They forget that the help has ears. Use that. I'm not the help. No. You're something far more dangerous. His smile was cold. You're invisible in plain sight. The gala was everything I'd imagined and nothing I was prepared for. Crystal chandeliers. Priceless art. Women in gowns that probably cost more than my car, dripping with jewels that could feed a small country. Men in tuxedos discussing money and power like they were discussing the weather, and Lorenzo, moving through it all like he owned the room because in many ways he did. Senator Williams, he said, approaching a silver-haired man with a practiced smile. Thank you for the invitation. Allow me to introduce Arya Delgado. She's a close friend. The senator's eyes swept over me with barely concealed interest. Delgado. Any relation to the musicians? My father was a guitarist. Session work mostly. Nothing famous. She's modest. Lorenzo's hand found my lower back, warm and possessive. Arya is a singer herself. Quite talented. I've been trying to convince her to perform at one of my events. You should take him up on that offer, the senator said. Lorenzo's events are legendary. So I've heard. We moved through the room in a pattern I slowly began to recognize. Lorenzo would introduce me, position me beside powerful men, and then step away just enough to let them speak freely. He'd return with drinks or small talk, extracting me before conversations became too personal, rotating me through a circuit of targets with military precision, and I listened to the senator discussing a land deal that sounded suspiciously like bribery. To the hedge fund manager bragging about insider trades. To the politician's wife complaining about her husband's mistress with enough details to fill a tabloid. By the end of the night, my head was spinning with secrets. Well, Lorenzo asked as we rode home in the back of his car. What did you learn? I told him. All of it. The deals, the affairs, the casual corruption that oozed from every conversation. He listened without expression. Good, he said finally. Better than good. You're a natural. I feel dirty. You should. This world is dirty. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the passing streetlights. But you survived your first night. That's more than many can say. What will you do with the information? Use it. Store it. Leverage it when necessary. He shrugged. Information is currency, Arya. You just made me very wealthy. And what do I get? Another day of your brother being alive. Isn't that enough? The reminder stung as it was meant to. When do I get to go back to my real life? The Blue Note? My apartment? Your apartment has been sublet. I arranged it while you were shopping. He held up a hand to stop my protest. You couldn't afford it anyway. Your savings were nearly depleted. You had no right, I have every right. For the next 12 months, every aspect of your life is my concern. His voice hardened. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. And the Blue Note? You can continue performing there. On nights when I don't need you. A ghost of a smile. I'm not a monster, Arya. I know your music matters to you. How generous I can be when properly motivated. He leaned back in his seat. Get some rest. Tomorrow we begin your real education. The education was brutal. Over the next 3 weeks, Lorenzo transformed me. Not just my appearance, though that continued to evolve with each new dress and each visit to stylists whose names I couldn't pronounce, but my mind. My instincts. My ability to read people. Watch his hands, Lorenzo instructed during one of our training sessions. When a man is lying, he touches his face. When he's nervous, he fidgets with his cuffs. When he's attracted, he leans forward. And when he's dangerous, he's perfectly still. Lorenzo's eyes held mine. Like this. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched me with an intensity that made my heart race for reasons I didn't want to examine. I see. Do you? He finally shifted, breaking the spell. The men you'll encounter aren't like the ones at your jazz club. They're predators. They'll sense weakness like sharks sense blood. You need to be stronger than them. I'm not strong. You're stronger than you know. You survived losing your parents. Survived raising a brother who repaid your sacrifice with betrayal. Survived waking up in a stranger's bed with no memory and no power. He moved closer. Strength isn't the absence of fear, Arya. It's the refusal to let fear control you. Is that why you're not afraid of anything? Who says I'm not afraid? You never show it. Showing and feeling are different things. He turned away, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I'm afraid constantly. Of losing what I've built. Of the enemies who circle like vultures. Of becoming like my father, cold, cruel, incapable of connection. You're already cold. Am I? He handed me a glass. Then why does it bother me when you look at me with hatred? Why do I care whether you're comfortable? Why do I lie awake at night thinking about the sound of your voice? I stared at him, caught off guard by the admission. You lie awake thinking about my voice? I told you, the night we met, your voice made me feel things I haven't felt in years. He sipped his wine, his expression guarded. That's why I chose you. Not just because of Diego. Because of you. I don't understand. Neither do I. He set down his glass. Finish your wine. We have another event tonight. He walked away, leaving me with questions that multiplied faster than answers. The memories started coming back in fragments, not the whole night, not yet, but pieces. Flashes that hit me at random moments, triggered by sounds or smells or the particular angle of light through a window. I remembered the champagne. Bottle after bottle, celebrating a performance that had felt magical. I remembered Diego's face appearing in the crowd, his expression desperate and afraid. I remembered following him outside, into an alley where men in dark suits waited. I remembered being afraid, and then nothing. Just a void where the rest of the night should have been. You're distracted. Lorenzo's voice cut through my thoughts. We were at dinner, another expensive restaurant, another evening of being displayed like a prized possession. What's wrong? I'm remembering things. From that night. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. What things? The alley. The men who were waiting. Diego was terrified. I met his eyes. What happened in that alley, Lorenzo? You were brought to me. We negotiated. You agreed to my terms. There's more. I can feel it. I pushed aside my plate. Tell me the truth. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment. There was a complication, he said finally. One of my men was overzealous. He frightened you badly. I intervened. Intervened how? I removed him from the situation. Permanently. Lorenzo's voice was flat. He crossed a line. I don't tolerate cruelty toward innocents. But you tolerate blackmail, coercion, holding someone's brother hostage to force compliance? Those are business. What he was doing was personal. His jaw tightened. You were terrified, Arya, shaking so badly you could barely stand. The sight of it affected me. So you brought me to your penthouse out of the goodness of your heart? I brought you to my penthouse because you refused to let go of my hand. His eyes held mine. You begged me not to leave you alone, said you felt safe with me. And despite every instinct telling me to keep my distance, I couldn't walk away. I don't remember any of that. The mind protects itself from trauma. Perhaps forgetting was your protection. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for the arrangement, that was necessary. But for the fear. You didn't deserve that. I pulled my hand back, confused by the warmth his touch sparked. Why are you telling me this now? Because you asked. And because... He paused, something flickering in his expression. Because I'm tired of being the villain in your story. Whatever you think of me, whatever I've done, I'm not the monster you've made me in your mind. Then what are you? A man doing what he has to do to survive. Same as you. He stood, leaving money on the table. Come. The car is waiting. We rode home in silence, but something had shifted between us, something I wasn't ready to name. That night, another memory surfaced that I was in his arms. Not in a way that was threatening, in a way that felt safe. He was carrying me somewhere, and I was crying, and he was whispering words I couldn't quite make out, but the feeling was clear. For one moment, in the middle of the worst night of my life, I had felt protected. By the man who was now my captor. The irony wasn't lost on me. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling of my gilded cage, trying to reconcile the monster I'd constructed with the man who'd admitted he couldn't walk away when I begged him to stay. Maybe the truth was somewhere in between. Maybe we were both more complicated than the roles we'd been assigned. Or maybe I was just desperate to find humanity in a situation that had none. Either way, I knew one thing for certain: these 12 months were going to be much harder than I'd imagined, and not for the reasons I'd expected. 2 months into my arrangement, I stopped counting the days. It wasn't that I'd accepted my situation. I hadn't. But somewhere between the galas and the private dinners and the endless parade of powerful people whose secrets I collected like pearls, I'd stopped feeling like a prisoner. I'd started feeling like something else entirely. You're smiling, Lorenzo observed one morning over breakfast. That's new. I had a good performance last night. The Blue Note had welcomed me back with open arms, and singing there again, being myself again even for a few hours, had reminded me of who I was before all this. No. I was there. I looked up sharply. You were. In the back. I didn't want to distract you. He sipped his coffee, not meeting my eyes. You were extraordinary. The way you interpret music, the emotion you bring to every note. I've never seen anything like it. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? Would you have performed differently if you'd known? Maybe. Probably. I set down my fork. You make me nervous. Still? After 2 months? You've always made me nervous. That hasn't changed. What has changed? Question hung between us. I could have deflected. Could have retreated behind the walls I'd constructed to protect myself. Instead, I found myself answering honestly. The way I feel about it. His eyes met mine, and something electric passed between us. Explain. First, you made me nervous because I was afraid. Now, I paused, searching for words. Now I'm nervous for different reasons. What reasons? I don't know yet. The admission cost me something. But I don't think it's fear anymore. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. I've been trying to maintain professional distance. To treat this as the business arrangement it's supposed to be. He stood, moving toward the windows. But you make that very difficult. How? By being yourself. by not becoming the cold, calculated operative I tried to create. He turned to face me. I've trained dozens of people over the years. None of them have affected me the way you do. Maybe that's because you didn't blackmail them into servitude. Maybe. Or maybe it's because none of them were you. He crossed back to me, stopping close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm going to do something that I shouldn't, he said quietly. And if you want me to stop, say the word. What are you going to do? This. He kissed me. It wasn't demanding or aggressive, nothing like what I'd expected from a man like him. It was soft, questioning, a request rather than a command, and against every rational thought in my head, I kissed him back. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer. My fingers tangled in his hair. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate, two people reaching for connection in the middle of a situation that should have made connection impossible. When we finally separated, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. That was a mistake, he murmured. Probably. We should pretend it didn't happen. Probably. Arya. His hands tightened on my waist. I can't think clearly when I'm near you. That's dangerous for both of us. Then stop being near me. I can't do that either. He pulled back to look at me, his expression raw in a way I'd never seen. You've ruined me. I don't know how. I don't know when. But somewhere between watching you sing and watching you survive everything I've thrown at you, something changed. What changed? I stopped wanting to control you. His thumb traced my cheekbone. I started wanting you to choose me. Lorenzo. A knock at the door interrupted us. Lorenzo's expression shuddered instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind his usual mask. He stepped away from me, straightening his jacket. Enter. Enzo appeared, his face grave. Sir. There's someone here to see you. Who? Camilla Rossi. Something cold flickered across Lorenzo's face. Tell her I'm not available. She says it's urgent. About the Marconi situation. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. For a moment, I saw genuine frustration, not at Enzo but at the interruption. Fine. Show her to my study. He turned to me. I apologize. This will only take a moment. Who's Camilla Rossi? Question came out before I could stop it. Lorenzo paused at the door. My former fiancé, he said. Nothing more. He left, and I stood alone in the dining room, my lips still tingling from his kiss, wondering who this woman was and why the mention of her name had made Lorenzo look almost afraid. I found out an hour later Camilla Rossi swept into the living room like she owned it, which apparently she once had expected to. She was stunning in the way of women born to wealth. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect features arranged in an expression of casual superiority. She was also looking at me like I was an insect to be crushed. So you're the singer. Her accent was Italian, cultured, dripping with disdain. Lorenzo's new pet project. I'm his associate. Is that what he's calling it now? Camilla laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. When we were together, he called his associates by their proper names. Mistresses. Distractions. Passing fancies. I'm none of those things. No? Then what are you? She moved closer, circling me with predatory grace. You're living in his home, wearing clothes he bought, tending events on his arm. What would you call that? A business arrangement. There's no such thing as business with Lorenzo. Everything is personal. Everything is about power. She stopped in front of me, her eyes cold. I've known him for 15 years. Loved him for 10. I was supposed to be his wife. And then you appear from nowhere and suddenly I'm being discarded like trash. I didn't take anything from you. Whatever happened between you and Lorenzo, what happened is that he saw something shiny and new and forgot everything we built together. Her voice cracked, just for a moment, revealing pain beneath the venom. I came here to negotiate, to remind him of his obligations. Instead, I find you installed in my position, wearing my future like a costume. Camilla. Lorenzo's voice cut through the tension. He stood in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. That's enough. Is it? She deserves to know what she's gotten herself into. Camilla spun to face him. You used me for years, Lorenzo. Used my family's connections, my influence, my love. And now you're doing the same to her. What I'm doing with Arya is none of your concern. It is when it affects our alliance. My father is threatening to withdraw support if you don't honor our engagement. Our engagement ended 2 years ago. 'Cause you ended it. Because you decided you didn't need me anymore. Tears glistened in Camilla's eyes, real tears, I realized with shock. I gave you everything. And you threw it away. I gave you every opportunity to move on. I was never cruel. Never dishonest about what I could offer. You offered nothing. You took and gave me nothing but empty promises. Camilla's voice broke completely. And now you're giving her what you should have given me. The room fell silent and I stood frozen, watching this woman's heart shatter in real time, feeling like an unwilling witness to someone else's tragedy. Camilla. Lorenzo's voice softened slightly. This isn't the place for this conversation. There is no other place. You refuse my calls. Return my letters unopened. The only way to see you is to force my way into your home. She wiped her eyes, composing herself with visible effort. I came to offer a truce. A way forward that benefits everyone. But I can see now that you've already made your choice. I haven't chosen anything. Haven't you? Her eyes flicked to me. The way you looked at her just now. The way you moved between us, protecting her. You've never done that for anyone. She laughed bitterly. I spent 10 years trying to earn that instinct. She managed it in 2 months. Camilla, I'll tell my father the alliance is over. Whatever happens next is on your head. She moved toward the door, pausing beside me. A word of advice, Singer. Don't fall in love with him. He'll destroy you the way he's destroyed everyone who's ever cared about him. She was gone before I could respond. The silence after Camilla's departure was deafening. Lorenzo stood by the window, his back to me, tension radiating from every line of his body. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Who is she? Really? Exactly who she said. My former fiancé. Our families have been allied for decades. The marriage was supposed to cement that alliance. He turned to face me. I ended it because I couldn't give her what she wanted. Which was love. Real love. The kind she deserved. His voice was hollow. I'm not capable of that. Or at least I didn't think I was. And now I'm not sure of anything. He crossed to me, stopping just short of touching. Camilla is right about one thing. I do destroy people. Everyone who gets close to me ends up damaged. It's why I've kept my distance for so long. You haven't kept your distance from me. No, I haven't. His hand rose, hovering near my face without making contact. And I should. Everything about this situation is wrong. You're here under duress. Any feelings you develop would be a product of manipulation, not genuine connection. You don't get to decide what I feel. Don't I? I've controlled every aspect of your life for 2 months. Clothes you wear, the places you go, the people you meet. How can you trust any emotion that develops under those conditions? Maybe I can't. I closed the distance between us, pressing my hand against his chest. But I know what I felt when you kissed me this morning. That wasn't manipulation. That was real. Arya, I'm not Camilla. I'm not looking for promises or commitment or some fairy tale ending. I'm just asking you to be honest with me. My eyes held his. Do you feel something? Something real? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. God help me, yes. Then stop fighting it. Stop protecting me from yourself. I pulled him closer. I've survived everything you've thrown at me so far. I can survive this too. This could destroy us both. Or it could save us. He kissed me then, not soft or questioning like before, but fierce, desperate. The kiss of a man who'd stopped fighting a battle he couldn't win, and I kissed him back with equal desperation, knowing I was falling into something dangerous, choosing to fall anyway because somewhere in the middle of this nightmare I'd found something I never expected: connection, and I wasn't ready to let it go. That night, everything changed. We didn't talk about what had happened. Didn't define it or analyze it or try to fit it into the boxes our arrangement required. We just existed. Together. In a space that felt separate from the complications surrounding us. He cooked dinner. I sang while he worked. We ate together, talked about music and art and the dreams we'd abandoned along the way. For a few hours, we were just two people getting to know each other. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Tell me something you've never told anyone, I said as we sat by the fire afterward. I hate what I do. The admission came quietly. Every deal, every threat, every manipulation, it chips away at something inside me. I became this because I had to, not because I wanted to. Then why continue? 'Cause the alternative is worse. If I step back, someone else takes over. Someone without my restraints. His eyes found mine. I'm not a good man, Arya. But I'm better than the alternatives. That's a lonely way to live. It was. Until you. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. This isn't something I planned for. He reached for my hand. But I know I don't want to go back to who I was before you. Before someone looked at me and saw something worth saving. I never said I wanted to save you. You didn't have to. It's in your eyes every time you look at me. Kissed my knuckles. Maybe that's what scares me most. Why? Because I'm starting to believe you might succeed. We sat together until the fire died, holding hands, saying nothing, and for the first time since I'd woken up in his bed with no memory, I didn't want to escape. I wanted to stay. 3 weeks of stolen moments, 3 weeks of kisses behind closed doors and lingering touches at events and nights spent talking until dawn. 3 weeks of falling deeper into something neither of us had words for, and then Camilla made her move. I was at the Blue Note, finishing my second set of the evening when I noticed the men at the back of the room. They weren't my usual audience, too polished, too watchful, with the kind of stillness Lorenzo had taught me to recognize as dangerous. They were here for me. I finished my song, bowed to the applause, and slipped backstage with my heart pounding. Mia was waiting in the dressing room, her face pale. There are men asking for you. They say they have a message from someone named Rossi. Where's Enzo? I don't know. He stepped outside 20 minutes ago. He hasn't come back. Fear coiled in my stomach. Enzo never left me unattended. Never. Is there a back exit? Through the kitchen. But Arya, what's going on? Who are these people? People I don't want to meet. I grabbed my bag. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. I slipped through the kitchen, nodding to the cooks who knew me well enough not to ask questions. The back door led to an alley that smelled like garbage and rained. A black car was waiting. The door opened before I could run. Miss Delgado. A man stepped out, middle-aged, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now just cold. I'm Vittorio Rossi, Camilla's father. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen. He gestured to the car. Get in. Please. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. And if I refuse, then it becomes unpleasant. His expression didn't change. Your bodyguard is currently unconscious in my custody. Your brother is at an establishment I own, running up a new debt he can't afford. And your lover is about to receive information that will destroy any trust you've built. What information? Get in the car, Miss Delgado. All will be explained. I thought about running. about screaming, about fighting my way free, but Vittorio Rossi had Enzo, had leverage over Diego. And whatever information he was threatening to reveal, I needed to know before Lorenzo did. I got in the car. The drive took us to a townhouse in the Upper East Side, old money territory, where every brick whispered of generations of power and privilege. Camilla was waiting inside. You came. She looked different than before, harder, more controlled. Like she'd shed the emotional vulnerability and replaced it with something colder. I wasn't sure you would. Your father didn't give me much choice. No. He rarely does. She gestured to a chair. Sit. We have things to discuss. Like what? How to destroy my life. You've already made your feelings clear. This isn't about my feelings. This is about survival, yours and mine. Camilla settled across from me. My father wants to use you to bring down Lorenzo. I'm offering you an alternative. What kind of alternative? Information. The truth about that night, the night you lost your memory. Her eyes held mine. I know what really happened, Arya. Everything Lorenzo hasn't told you. My blood ran cold. You're lying. Am I? She pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Medical records from the night in question. Toxicology reports. Witness statements. She paused. You were drugged, Arya. Not by Lorenzo directly, but by one of his men. A man named Carlo who decided that a little insurance would make you more cooperative. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking. Lorenzo said he dealt with Carlo. He did. After Carlo had already administered the drugs. After you were already losing consciousness. Camilla's voice softened slightly. I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. Why? What do you get out of this? Freedom. From my father's schemes. From the expectation that I'll spend my life trying to win back a man who never loved me. She stood, moving to the window. My father wants war with Lorenzo. He's been waiting for an excuse, and your presence provided one. If I can convince you to leave voluntarily, to end this farce before it escalates further, everyone wins. Except me. You win most of all. You get your life back. Your brother's debt disappears, I'll see to it personally. And you walk away clean before this world destroys you the way it's destroyed everyone else. And Lorenzo? Lorenzo survives. Weakened but intact. Better than what my father has planned. Camilla turned to face me. I loved him, Arya. Still do, in some twisted way. I don't want to see him destroyed. But I'm not willing to sacrifice myself to protect him anymore. I looked at the folder. At the evidence of what had been done to me without my knowledge or consent. At the proof that even Lorenzo's protection had limits. If I leave, what guarantees do I have? My word. Which I know means nothing to you. Camilla moved closer. But also this, my father's plans include killing you. Tonight, if necessary. If you stay with Lorenzo, you become a casualty in a war that has nothing to do with you. If you leave, you live. And if I tell Lorenzo about this conversation, then my father accelerates his timeline and people start dying immediately. Starting with your brother. Her expression was grave. I'm trying to give you a way out, Arya. The only way out that doesn't end in blood. I sat in that elegant room, surrounded by wealth and power and impossible choices, trying to find a path that didn't lead to disaster. I need time to think. You have until morning. After that, my father takes matters into his own hands. Camilla nodded to someone behind me. Enzo will be released within the hour. He'll take you back to the penthouse. What you do with this information is your choice. She left, and I was alone with the folder and the terrible weight of truth. Enzo was silent the entire drive home. His jaw was bruised, his knuckles scraped, and he wouldn't look at me. Whatever had happened during his captivity had shaken him in ways I'd never seen before. Are you okay? I asked as we pulled up to the penthouse. I failed you. His voice was rough. I let them take you. That's not okay. You were outnumbered. Ambushed. That's not failure, that's circumstance. In my world, circumstance is failure. Anything less than complete protection is failure. He finally met my eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Delgado. Truly. You have nothing to apologize for. I left him in the car and walked into the penthouse. Clutching the folder like a lifeline, Lorenzo was waiting. Enzo called ahead. He moved toward me, his expression tight with concern. Are you hurt? No. Just shaken. What did Rossi want? I looked at him, at this man who'd become everything to me in such a short time. The man who'd held me while I cried. Who'd kissed me like I was precious. Who'd promised to protect me from a world that was actively trying to destroy us both, and I made a choice. He wanted me to leave you. I handed him the folder. He gave me this. Evidence about what really happened the night I lost my memory. Lorenzo took the folder, his expression unreadable. You're showing me this. Yes. Why? Because you asked me once to choose you. To trust you. I stepped closer. This is me choosing. Whatever's in that folder, whatever you've kept from me, I want to hear it from you. Not from your enemies. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened the folder, scanning the contents. Carlo drugged you. His voice was hollow. I told you I dealt with him. I didn't tell you what he did first. Why? 'Cause I was ashamed. 'Cause I should have protected you better. Because by the time I realized what had happened, the damage was already done. He set down the folder. You were barely conscious when I found you. Terrified. Clinging to me like I was the only safe thing in a world of monsters. And you brought me here. I brought you here because I couldn't bear to leave you alone. Because something about your fear made me want to be better than what I am. His eyes met mine. I've done terrible things, Arya. Things that can't be forgiven. But what Carlo did to you, that wasn't me. That was everything I've spent my life trying not to become. I believe you. Do you? After everything? After learning that my people drugged you, that my world nearly destroyed you before we even properly met. I believe you because you didn't have to tell me the truth. You could have lied. You could have destroyed that folder and denied everything. I cupped his face in my hands. But you chose honesty. That means something. It doesn't make me good. No. But it makes you human. Kissed him softly. And human is enough. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like I might disappear. Rossi wants war, he said against my hair. If you stay with me, you'll be in the middle of it. Then we fight together. You're not a fighter. I wasn't. But I'm learning. I pulled back to look at him. You've spent 3 months teaching me to survive in your world. Maybe it's time to put those lessons to use. This isn't a game, Arya. People will die. People will die whether I'm here or not. At least this way, I'm choosing my side. I straightened my spine. I'm not leaving, Lorenzo. Not because of Rossi, not because of Camilla, not because of anything. I'm yours, remember? That was the deal. The deal ended the moment I fell in love with you. The words hit me like lightning. You love me? Hopelessly. Irrationally. In a way that terrifies me. He cupped my face in his hands. I never meant for this to happen. Never wanted to be vulnerable again. But you walked into my life and refused to be controlled, and somewhere along the way you became everything. Lorenzo, you don't have to say it back. I know this isn't fair. I love you too. He froze. What? I love you. Against all reason. Against everything I should feel given how we started. Tears streamed down my face. You're impossible and infuriating and the most dangerous man I've ever known. And I love you anyway. He kissed me then, deep and desperate, with all the fear and hope and love he'd been holding back. Whatever comes next, he murmured against my lips, we face it together. Together, I agreed, and for the first time since I'd woken up in his bed with no memory, I felt like I knew exactly where I belonged. The war came 3 days later. Rossi's men hit our operations simultaneously. Warehouses, clubs, businesses Lorenzo had built over decades. It was surgical and devastating, designed to cripple without killing. He's testing our defenses, Lorenzo said, surveying reports in his study. Looking for weaknesses. Did he find any? Everyone has weaknesses. The question is whether they can be exploited. He looked up at me. You should leave this city. Go somewhere safe until this is over. No. Arya, I said no. I moved to stand beside him. I'm not running. Not now. Not after everything. This isn't about bravery. It's about survival. Then help me survive here. Teach me to fight. Use me the way you originally planned, as your eyes and ears. I met his eyes. I came to you as leverage. Let me become something more. He was quiet for a long moment. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. Then we prepare. He took my hand. Together. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in survival. Lorenzo taught me things I never thought I'd need to know. How to recognize surveillance, how to move through crowds without being followed, how to hold a gun without trembling. Not to fight, he said. To protect myself if everything else failed. You're a quick learner, he observed after a particularly intense training session. I had good motivation. I set down the weapon, flexing fingers that ached from the unfamiliar grip. Fear of death tends to sharpen focus. It's more than that. You have instincts. He moved closer, adjusting my stance. The first night we met, you negotiated your survival in a room full of predators. That's not something you can teach. I was terrified. Terror and courage aren't opposites. They're partners. His hands lingered on my shoulders. The bravest people I know are the ones who act despite being terrified. Is that what you do? Every day. He kissed my forehead. Come. We have a meeting. The meeting was with Lorenzo's inner circle, men and women I'd come to know over the past months. Enzo, of course, his loyalty unwavering despite his failure at the Blue Note. Sophia, who managed Lorenzo's legitimate businesses with an efficiency that bordered on frightening. Marco, whose specialty I never asked about but could easily guess, and now me. Rossi is planning something big, Sophia reported, spreading documents across the conference table. We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated strike within the week. Target. Multiple. But the primary objective seems to be you, sir. Sophia's eyes flicked to me. And Miss Delgado. He wants leverage, Lorenzo said flatly. He thinks taking Arya will bring me to my knees. Will it? Marco asked. The room fell silent. Everyone waited for Lorenzo's response. If Rossi touches her, there won't be enough left of him for a funeral. Lorenzo's voice was ice. But we're not going to let it get that far. What's the plan? I asked. We turn his strategy against him. Lorenzo stood, moving to a map on the wall. Rossi expects us to be defensive, to protect our assets and wait for his attack. Instead, we're going to strike first. At what? At him. Directly. Lorenzo's finger landed on a point on the map. He's hosting a charity gala this weekend. Black tie. 500 guests. The entire city's elite will be there. You want to attack him at a party? I want to expose him at a party. There's a difference. Lorenzo turned to face the room. Rossi has spent decades building a reputation as a legitimate businessman, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. But underneath that facade, he's as dirty as any of us. Dirtier, Enzo muttered. We have evidence of his actual operations: arms dealing, human trafficking, things that would destroy him if they became public. Lorenzo's eyes found mine. We're going to release that evidence at his own event, in front of everyone who matters. How? That's where you come in. He moved closer to me. You're the only one who can get close enough without raising suspicion. Me? Rossi knows who I am. He kidnapped me 3 weeks ago. He knows you as my associate, my lover. But he doesn't know what you're capable of. Lorenzo's hand found my face. You'll attend as a performer, a last-minute replacement for the scheduled entertainment. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it will be too late. You want me to infiltrate his party and expose him while singing jazz standards? I want you to be exactly what you've always been, invisible in plain sight. His eyes held mine. Can you do it? I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The fear, the loss, the slow transformation from victim to participant, the love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. Yes, I said. I can do it. Then let's begin. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. I stood backstage at the Rossi mansion, dressed in a gown of deep blue silk that Lorenzo had chosen specifically for the occasion. In my purse was a flash drive containing enough evidence to destroy Vittorio Rossi. In my earpiece was Lorenzo's voice, calm and steady. You're doing well. Just breathe. Easy for you to say. You're not about to perform for a man who threatened to kill you. No. I'm about to watch the woman I love walk into danger while I wait outside like a coward. His voice tightened. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. If anything goes wrong, say the word. Enzo's team is positioned at every exit. We'll extract you in under 60 seconds. Romantic. Practical. A pause. I love you, Arya. I love you too. Now let me work. I stepped onto the stage. The ballroom was everything I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, women in gowns that cost more than cars. And at the center of it all, Vittorio Rossi, holding court like the king he believed himself to be. He didn't recognize me at first. The makeup, the different hairstyle, the transformation from captive to performer, it was enough to grant me invisibility. I began to sing. The first song was a standard. The Way You Look Tonight, soft and romantic, designed to blend into the background of conversation and champagne. The audience barely noticed me. Perfect. The second song was faster, more engaging. People began to watch, to listen, to see the woman on the stage instead of just hearing her. By the third song, I had the room's attention, and that's when I made my move. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite my hammering heart. I'd like to dedicate this next song to our gracious host, Mr. Vittorio Rossi. Rossi looked up, his expression shifting from pleased to suspicious as he finally recognized me. A man of many talents, I continued. Businessman, philanthropist, and, according to documents I'm about to share with everyone in this room, international arms dealer and human trafficker. Chaos erupted. I pulled the flash drive from my purse, connecting it to the venue's display system as I'd been taught. Images began to appear on every screen in the ballroom: photographs, financial records, testimony from victims. The evidence of Rossi's true nature, laid bare for all to see. What is this? Rossi's voice cut through the noise. Security. Stop her. But it was too late. The damage was done. 500 of New York's most influential people were staring at proof of his crimes. I felt hands grab me from behind. Rossi's security finally mobilizing. But I didn't fight. Didn't need to because Lorenzo was already there. He appeared from nowhere, or so it seemed to the crowd. In reality, he'd been waiting just outside, timing his entrance perfectly. Vittorio. His voice carried through the ballroom, silencing the chaos. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Vitali. Rossi's face was purple with rage. You did this. You and your whore. Careful how you speak about my future wife. Lorenzo moved through the crowd, his presence commanding attention. The evidence speaks for itself. Every person in this room now knows exactly who you are. This proves nothing, it proves everything. And by morning, so will every newspaper in the city. Lorenzo stopped in front of Rossi, his expression cold. You wanted war. You got it. But wars have consequences. You think you've won? I'll destroy you, you've already lost. Look around. Lorenzo gestured at the crowd, at the faces turned away from Rossi in disgust, at the phones already calling lawyers and publicists. Your empire is crumbling. Your allies are abandoning you. By this time tomorrow, you'll be lucky if you're not in prison. Rossi's face contorted with fury. I saw his hand move toward his jacket, toward something hidden there. Gun! I screamed. Everything happened at once. Rossi drew the weapon. Lorenzo moved to shield me. Enzo appeared from nowhere, tackling Rossi before he could fire. The gun went off. For a terrible moment, I thought Lorenzo had been hit. But when I looked, he was standing, unharmed. The bullet had gone wide, shattering a champagne tower instead of flesh. It's over, Lorenzo said quietly, looking down at Rossi, who was now pinned to the floor by Enzo. Accept it. Sirens wailed in the distance, police called by guests or staff or perhaps Lorenzo himself. The gala had become a crime scene, and I stood in the middle of it all, still holding a microphone, having just brought down an empire with a song. The aftermath was surprisingly peaceful. Rossi was arrested that night, along with several of his associates. The evidence I'd released was more than enough to ensure convictions. His assets were frozen, his family scattered, his influence evaporated in the span of a single evening. Camilla came to see us 2 days later. I didn't know about my father's plans, she said, standing in Lorenzo's living room. Not all of them. Not the extent. Does it matter? Lorenzo asked. It does to me. She looked at me. I told you to leave to protect you. I never wanted you dead. I just wanted. She trailed off. I wanted what I couldn't have. I see that now. What will you do? I asked. Leave. Start over somewhere my name doesn't carry so much weight. She almost smiled. Europe, perhaps. I've always wanted to see Paris. You could stay, Lorenzo offered. The war is over. There's no reason, there's every reason. Camilla's eyes softened. You love her. Really love her in a way you never loved me. I spent too many years chasing something that was never mine. She stepped toward the door. Be happy, Lorenzo. Both of you. It's more than most of us get. She left, and I watched her go with something almost like sympathy. She's not what I expected, I said. None of this is what I expected. Lorenzo pulled me into his arms. You were supposed to be a problem, a liability. Instead, you became everything. Funny how that works. Hilarious. Kissed me softly. There's one more thing we need to discuss. What? Your brother. I tensed. I'd almost forgotten about Diego in the chaos of recent weeks. Almost. What about him? His debt was cleared the moment you agreed to our arrangement. He's been free for months. Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. But he's also been gambling again. Running up new debts at establishments I don't control. How much? Enough to be a problem. For him, not for us. He took my hand. I can make it go away. Pay it off, give him a fresh start. But that's your decision to make. Why mine? Because he's your family. And because I've learned that some things can't be forced. His eyes held mine. What do you want to do? I thought about Diego. About all the times I'd rescued him. All the times he'd promised to change and hadn't. All the times I'd sacrificed myself for someone who couldn't or wouldn't save himself. Pay it off, I said finally. One more time. But after this, he's on his own. You're sure? He's my brother. I love him. But I can't keep being his safety net. I squeezed Lorenzo's hand. Some people have to save themselves. That's very wise. I had a good teacher. He smiled, and for a moment the weight of everything we'd survived lifted. We'd won against all odds, against every enemy, against the circumstances that should have destroyed us. We'd won, and now finally we could begin. The final memory came back on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when it hit me like a wave. Not fragments this time, but the whole picture. Every moment of that night, restored in vivid, terrible detail. I remembered the champagne. The celebration after my best performance in months. Diego's face appearing in the crowd, pale and desperate. I remembered following him outside, into the alley where men in dark suits waited. The fear that had gripped me when I realized we weren't alone. I remembered Carlo, the man who'd grabbed me, whose breath had smelled like garlic and violence. Prick of a needle against my neck. The world going soft and strange around the edges, and I remembered Lorenzo not as a predator or a captor but as a savior. He'd arrived like a storm, tearing Carlo away from me with controlled fury. He'd held me as the drugs pulled me under, whispering words I couldn't quite hear but could somehow feel. You're safe. I have you. Nothing will hurt you now. I'd clung to him, a stranger, a dangerous man, someone I should have feared, because in that moment he was the only solid thing in a dissolving world, and when I'd begged him not to leave me alone, he hadn't. He'd carried me to his car. Brought me to his home. Sat beside my bed through the night, watching over me like a guardian angel who'd forgotten he wasn't supposed to care. That was the truth of how we began, not blackmail. Not coercion. But a moment of unexpected tenderness from a man who'd built his life on being incapable of it. I stood in the kitchen, coffee forgotten, tears streaming down my face as the full weight of memory settled over me. Aria. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. What's wrong? I remember. My voice was barely a whisper. Everything. I remember everything. He went still. What do you remember? Carlo. The drugs. You coming for me. I crossed to him, my hands finding his face. You saved me, Lorenzo. Not because of the arrangement. Not because of Diego. You saved me because you couldn't walk away. Aria, you stayed with me all night. You held my hand until I fell asleep. You told me I was safe. Tears blurred my vision. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. To confuse gratitude with something more. His hands covered mine. I wanted you to choose me because you wanted to, not because you felt you owed me. You idiot. I laughed through my tears. I chose you months ago. Without knowing any of this. Do you think my feelings would have been less real if I'd known the truth? I didn't know. I've never done this before, fallen for someone. I didn't have a map. Neither did I. But we found our way anyway. Kissed him softly. No more secrets, Lorenzo. Whatever else happens, I want the truth between us. Always. Always, he agreed. Starting now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and my heart stopped. I've been carrying this for 3 weeks, he said. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting until the war was over, until we were safe, until I could offer you a future instead of just survival. Lorenzo, I know it's fast. I know our beginning was chaos and confusion and everything a relationship shouldn't be. But I also know that you're the only person who's ever made me want to be better than what I am. He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the morning light, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like captured stars. Marry me, Arya. Not because of any arrangement. Not because of debt or obligation. Just because I love you and I can't imagine my life without you in it. I stared at the ring. At him. At the future he was offering. Complicated, dangerous, nothing like the quiet life I'd once imagined, but also full of love. passion, of a connection I'd never expected to find. Yes. The word came out without hesitation. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I pulled him into a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and everything we'd survived. You impossible, infuriating, beautiful man. Yes. He slid the ring onto my finger with trembling hands, the most powerful man in New York, undone by 3 letters. You've made me the happiest criminal in history, he murmured against my lips. Former criminal. Mostly former. He grinned. Old habits. I'll break you of them. I'm counting on it. We married in the spring, not in a grand cathedral or an exclusive venue, but in Lorenzo's grandmother's garden, the one place that still held memories of who he'd been before the darkness claimed him. The guest list was small. Enzo stood as best man, his stoic face cracking into something resembling joy. Mia came from the Blue Note, still bewildered by how her bartender friend had ended up marrying a crime lord. Sophia handled the logistics with her usual terrifying efficiency, and Diego walked me down the aisle. My brother had changed in the months since Rossi's fall. Not completely. I wasn't naive enough to believe addiction could be cured overnight, but enough. He'd started attending meetings, found a job, begun the slow, painful work of becoming the man I'd always believed he could be. You look beautiful, he said as we waited for the music to begin. You look sober. 93 days. A ghost of a smile. Not that I'm counting. I'm proud of you, Diego. Don't be. Not yet. His eyes met mine. I owe you everything, Arya. My life. My freedom. A second chance I didn't deserve. I'm going to spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of what you've given me. You don't owe me anything. You're my brother. That's not transactional. It is when you've taken as much as I have. He squeezed my hand. Let me do this right. Walk you down the aisle. Give you away to a man who'll protect you better than I ever could. Tears pricked my eyes. Diego, the music's starting. He straightened his borrowed suit. Ready? Ready. We walked through the garden together, past flowers that bloomed in defiance of the season, toward the man who waited at the altar with tears in his eyes. Lorenzo, my captor. My teacher. My protector. My love. The ceremony was simple, traditional vows spoken with voices that trembled despite our best efforts. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Enzo cracked his knuckles meaningfully and the small crowd laughed. You may kiss the bride. Lorenzo kissed me like we were alone in the world. Like the past didn't matter and the future was infinite. Like I was the only thing that had ever made sense. I love you, Mrs. Vitali, he murmured against my lips. I love you too, Mr. Vitali. I smiled. Now stop kissing me. We have guests. They can wait. Lorenzo. He kissed me again, and I stopped arguing. Some battles weren't worth winning. The reception was held in Lorenzo's penthouse, the same space where I'd woken up with no memory, terrified and alone. It looked different now. Warmer. Full of people and laughter and the kind of joy I'd never associated with these rooms. Strange, isn't it? Lorenzo appeared beside me as I stood by the window, watching the city lights. How much can change in a year? A year ago, I didn't know your name. Now I'm your wife. Having regrets? Not even one. I leaned into his embrace. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd walked through a different door that night. If Diego hadn't gotten into trouble. If Carlo hadn't, then we never would have met. His arms tightened around me. Strange as it sounds, I'm grateful for all of it. Chaos. The pain. Even the fear. Because it brought you to me. That's a very dark way of looking at fate. I'm a very dark person. He turned me to face him. But you make me want to be lighter. Every day you make me want to be better. Then be better. I pressed my hand against his chest. Not for me. For yourself. because you deserve to be more than what this world made you. I don't deserve anything. You deserve everything. Kissed him softly. And I'm going to spend the rest of our lives proving it. The music shifted to something slow and familiar, a jazz standard I'd performed at the Blue Note the night we met. Lorenzo smiled, recognizing it. Dance with me. Here. Now. Here. Now. Always. He pulled me onto the improvised dance floor. I want to spend every moment I have left dancing with you. We swayed together in the middle of our wedding reception, surrounded by people who loved us, lost in a moment that felt like the beginning of everything. 1 year later, I stood on the stage at the Blue Note, finishing my final set of the evening, looking out at a crowd that had grown considerably since my days as an unknown performer. Lorenzo sat in the back where he always sat, watching me with eyes that still made my heart race. Some things hadn't changed. I still performed 3 nights a week. Still lost myself in music that had been my salvation since childhood. Still found peace on stages that felt more like home than any building ever could, but other things had changed completely. I was no longer Aria Delgado, struggling musician with a gambling brother and a mountain of debt. I was Aria Vitali, wife of one of the most powerful men in New York, mother-to-be of a child we'd discovered was coming just 2 months ago. The pregnancy had been a surprise. A wonderful, terrifying, life-altering surprise. You're glowing, Lorenzo had said when I told him. I'm nauseous. Beautifully nauseous. He pulled me into his arms, tears streaming down his face. I never thought I'd have this. A family. A future. Someone to pass everything on to. Everything? The good parts. The legitimate parts. He'd smiled. I'm done with the darkness, Arya. For you. For our child. I want to build something that lasts. And he had. Over the past year, Lorenzo had systematically dismantled his criminal operations, transitioning everything to legitimate business. It wasn't complete, these things took time, but the progress was undeniable. The man who'd once ruled New York's underworld was becoming something new, something better, because of me, because of us. Thank you, everyone, I said into the microphone as the final song ended. You've been a wonderful audience. See you next week. Crowd applauded. I bowed, made my way backstage, and found Lorenzo waiting with flowers, as he always did, as he always would. You were magnificent. I was off-key in the second verse. Magnificently off-key. He kissed me. Ready to go home? Always. We walked out of the Blue Note together, into a night that sparkled with city lights and possibility. His hand found mine, our rings catching the streetlight, symbols of everything we'd built from the ashes of that impossible beginning. Do you ever think about it? I asked as we walked. The night we met? Every day. Do you regret it? Any of it? I regret the fear I caused you. The manipulation. The way we started. He stopped, turning to face me. But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret falling in love. And I don't regret a single moment of this life we're building. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are. His hand found my still flat stomach. And they brought us here. To this moment. To this future. I covered his hand with mine. I woke up in your bed with no memory, I said. You handed me coffee and told me we needed to talk about what I'd promised you. I remember. I was so scared. So angry. So certain that you were the villain of my story. And now I know the truth. I smiled. You were never the villain. You were just a man who didn't know how to ask for what he wanted. What did I want? The same thing I wanted. Kissed him softly. Someone to see past the surface. Someone to stay when leaving would be easier. Someone to love unconditionally even when we don't deserve it. Did you find that? I found you. I took his hand, resuming our walk. That's more than enough. We walked home through streets that had witnessed our beginning, our battles, our victory. Past the hotel where we'd first met. Past the club where I'd exposed Rossi. Past all the places that held memories of who we'd been and who we'd become, and as we stepped into our building, into the elevator that would carry us to the penthouse where everything had started, I thought about the morning I'd woken up with no memory. I'd been so afraid, but fear, I'd learned, was just another beginning, and this beginning, this beautiful, complicated, impossible love story, was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed, She woke up in his bed with no memory of last night. Please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Your comments mean the world to me. Let me know what you thought and what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Until next time, keep reading and stay mysterious.